So fellas, summer is over and we've survived the depressing month that is September. So that means we are officially in spooky season. Horror is my favourite genre, so I will be milking it for content this month. As we all know, the horror genre is known for producing a load of sequels to various standards of quality, especially during the 80s. Slasher sequels were all the craze. Therefore, for today's video, I thought to have a look at the sequels that aren't so loved, and for good reason. So in no particular order, here are the worst horror sequels. To start off this list, we have The Hills of Eyes 2. This isn't the critically panned sequel from 1985 that has a dog flashback. Instead, it's the critically panned sequel from 2007. This was the more modern film for me as a kid, and I saw it a few times, as I'm a huge fan of the 2006 remake. But man, is this one terrible. The plot focuses on a bunch of soldiers as they investigate a military base in the New Mexico desert, where they encounter the mutants. The men are then picked off one by one, and the women are taken so the mutant cannibals can breed with them. Yeah, that's the plot. It involves a lot of assault on women, which is really gross and horrible. This film was also written by Wes Craven and his son Jonathan, which is a really strange father and son bonding moment. Considering the characters in this film are soldiers, they are absolutely useless and constantly make dumb mistakes that get them killed. I'm pretty sure one guy even blows himself up. I have no idea how any of these guys got passed off. I think a cooler idea for this film would be to have the military just come in and start wiping out the mutants after the events of the first film, which I do actually think happens in a comic or something. It was very obvious that this sequel was made to be a gore fest and to capitalise on the success of the remake. But I will say it did have one effective jump scare where a hand shoots out of a toilet. As a kid, that moment had me terrified to go take a shit, so well done on that, The Hills of Eyes 2. Next up is It Chapter 2. There was so much hype leading up to the release of this film. The first one was a massive success that crushed the box office, and the cast they got to play the grown-up versions of the Losers Club was perfect. Yet, when it released, it was such a letdown. I think the biggest problem I had with this film was that it was just so boring. The film was nearly 3 hours long, and most of that runtime was spent on fetch quests, where each loser had to grab an item from their past to use it in a ritual which turned out to be useless anyway, making the previous 2 hours pointless. It was just the same thing where one character would go to get their item, and then they would have a flashback to their childhood where they encountered it, and then they would encounter him in the present. It just became so tedious and repetitive. I remember when I was watching it in cinema, I just kept looking at my watch, hoping the film would end. It got to the point where I wanted it to just kill them all instead of just playing with them as they're adults. Like, come on man, they're adults now, just kill them, get it done with. The ending was also just terrible. Like, they just bully him to death. It was so underwhelming and laughable. At least the cast was good though, I guess. Now, for a film that didn't have a good cast, or a good anything to be honest, we have Hellraiser Revelations. The Hellraiser franchise really started to decline after the second installment. And after the fourth film, they all went straight to DVD, and they were only made so the Weinstein Company could keep the rights to the franchise. This was no different for Revelations, as the film was rushed into production, and filming was completed within 3 weeks. This was the reason Doug Bradley did not return to play Pinhead, as he was not a fan of the quick shooting schedule and the small budget, which was estimated to be $300,000, and it shows. The effects in the film are so cheap looking, and the Pinhead we get looks like he was summoned from the Cenobite version of Temu, which I guess is just regular Temu. If I'm going to be honest, I don't really remember the plot to this one. I've only seen it once, and I couldn't put myself through it again for this list. I think it has two friends that go to Mexico, and then they solve the box, and then a year later, their family gets together, and then they solve the box, and then the usual Hellraiser stuff happens. That's what I can remember, and there's incest stuff between a brother and sister, which was gross. But yeah, this film is just awful, and it's super cheap. It's very obvious that zero passion or effort was put into it. I would say it's like watching a porn parody of Hellraiser, but the acting is actually worse here. Thankfully, the most recent entry in the franchise was pretty decent. For this next one, I'm going to treat you guys, and instead of one bad sequel, you're getting four. And those are every Wrong Turn film after the second one. The first Wrong Turn film was terrifying for me as a child, and it gave me a phobia of forests for years. I couldn't go into a forest without thinking I was going to be eaten by a mutant hillbilly cannibal. Anyway, the second film was surprisingly better than the first, as it had a fun premise with the reality TV game show they were on, but eventually every sequel after that became progressively worse. Technically, 4, 5, and 6 are prequels, but whatever. They were all just super mean-spirited, and they all had such unlikable characters that you couldn't wait to see die. I guess they did have some pretty fun kills, and that's probably where they put all the money into, because it definitely wasn't into the sets or the costumes, as it's very obvious in the fifth film they're using a studio to film, and in the sixth film, the cannibals just look like they are wearing masks you'd buy from a Halloween shop. All of these films also just became softcore pornos, especially the sixth film. That was full of graphic nudity and a lot of it was incestual. I'm pretty sure as well they used a real life missing persons photo without permission, so they had to blur that out on future DVD releases. I will admit though, despite how bad they are, I will still watch them from time to time, just because the first film was the first ever horror film I watched, so I have a love-hate relationship with this franchise, and I guess they are my guilty pleasures. Sometimes it's just fun to put on one of these terrible horror films with unlikable characters that just die in really gross ways. Sometimes that's just the mood you're in. We're going to talk about a more recent film with this next entry, and it is Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2022. I was debating choosing this or The Next Generation, but I think loads of people have already spoke about how bad that one is. This entry is like the fourth time this franchise has done a sequel to the first that ignores the rest, and honestly, I think at this point they should just say fuck it and merge all the timelines for a Leatherface multiverse. At least it's something different. With this film, you're kind of rooting for Leatherface, as the main characters are so annoying and unlikable. They're trying to build some Gen Z utopia or something, and it's cringe. They also force this old lady out of the house, and then she dies, so yeah, I think it's fair for Bubba to kill them. They also turned Leatherface into the Terminator in this one. Like, he takes 3 shotgun shots and a chainsaw to the face, and he's still fine. He also moves around like the Flash, and throws his chainsaw at people, but he's got to be like 80 years old in this one, so it's so dumb. They also bring back the character of Sally from the first film, but she is so pointless. There's a moment she has a chance to kill Leatherface, but doesn't, because she wants him to say the names of her dead friends, even though he never learned them. So how the hell is he going to be saying them? She also had a terrible death, which just made her inclusion seem disrespectful to the character, and to the original actress, Marilyn Burns. The only positive I can say about this film is that the cinematography was pretty good, and then that scene on the bus was also a lot of fun to just see Leatherface kill all these Gen Z kids. Next up on the list is Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. I will admit, I do find this nightmare film more entertaining than The Dream Child, as I find that one boring. But this was the final nail in the coffin for the franchise. The problem with this one is that it is far too goofy. You have Freddy doing a parody of The Wizard of Oz, and controlling someone with a power glove in a game. It is entertaining, especially if you get drunk and watch it with friends, but it is a far cry from the original. The dark humour and occasional quip from Freddy in the first film was just expanded to another level as the franchise went on, and eventually the series just became a parody of itself. With how many times Freddy quips, he would fit perfectly into the MCU. Within the plot, Freddy has killed all of the kids on Elm Street and the surrounding area, so he's now trying to find his child so he can go to other streets and other places in the world to kill the rest of the kids. So they retcon in a daughter for him, who's also like the only person who can truly defeat him. It's just a really dumb plot. But if you are drunk, this film is entertaining. At least Freddy was made scary again a few years later with a new nightmare. I'm going to talk about a real nightmare now, and that is Aliens vs Predator Requiem. The biggest problem with this film, other than the usual unlikable and underdeveloped characters, is how dark it is. You can hardly see anything, so you never know what's going on. Obviously, this was done to help with the creature effects, but when you can't even see them, what's the point? The scene in the sewer is especially bad for this, as you mainly just see the laser from the Predator cannon and nothing else. When I originally watched AVP2, it was on a dodgy copy, since as a kid I loved the first one, so I was so hyped to see the second one. My mom got me a pirated version, and if you think the lighting in the actual release was bad, man, you've seen nothing. Literally. It was pretty much just noise, and I didn't even know what happened at the end. So I asked my uncle as he went to cinema to watch it, and he was just like, yeah, they all got nuked. Which is a very anticlimactic ending. I think it would have been cooler to have the predator known as Wolf win the battle against the Pred Alien. I just thought he was a pretty cool predator. There's also a really gross scene where the Pred Alien puts a lot of aliens into a pregnant woman, and then 3 of them burst out of the stomach, which makes no sense as it would have just been 1. But yeah, it was a really gross and mean-spirited scene, which I think just wasn't needed in the film. I do hope the franchise can make a return in the future with an entry that's actually good and is closer to the 2010 game, as that would be sick. Or, they should just release the anime that Disney shelved. We're taking over Manhattan now with Friday the 13th Part 8. The Friday franchise was very popular in the 80s amongst horror fans. I mean, obviously, this was the 8th one. However, the series had seen a decline at the box office and with critics. So to spice it up, they thought to put Jason in a new setting, which was New York. The only problem was shooting in New York was expensive, and Paramount didn't want to spend the money. So a lot of ideas were scrapped, and instead, Jason is only in New York for the last 20 to 30 minutes of the film. The rest of the film is set on a cruise ship, and don't even ask how they got into Crystal Lake, I have no idea. Everything on this ship is just so boring, and all the kills had to be toned down, so the film has hardly any violence in it, which the series was known for. There's also random flashbacks to a young Jason, where he looks nothing like the younger versions from before. I think they just couldn't be bothered to do the makeup effects. Unfortunately, spicing up the setting did not help at the box office, as it only made $14 million, which is the lowest in the franchise. For our final entry, I'm going to say Evil Dead 2. Only joking, that film is perfect. The final entry on this list is Halloween Ends. There were quite a few choices I could have picked from the Halloween franchise, but I decided to go with Ends because it's more recent, and it was such a stinky way to end the franchise. I remember loads of people hyping up the 2018 film, even though I thought it was average at best. It was just another unnecessary sequel to the first. And with how the trilogy ended, it was kind of disrespectful. I can already see in 10 years' time, they will say this wasn't canon, and they will do another true sequel to the original. For some reason, they thought it would be a genius idea, for that in the final film, they would switch focus to a new character and have him become a killer. This maybe could have worked if it was set up in the previous film, but throwing it into the third just showed they never had a plan for this new trilogy. And they only made it due to 2018 Halloween being a huge success. It was an obvious cash grab that failed to deliver a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. Michael Myers is also hardly in the film. He let someone else do the killing for him, which, to be fair, I can't blame him as he's like 80 years old. Anyway, he appears at the end of the film, has a fight with Laurie and is killed, and then he is thrown into a massive shredder whilst the town shouts, "Evil dies tonight." It was just so stupid. I think what they should do with these 80-year-old versions of Leatherface and Michael Myers is put them in a film with other old horror icons and let them just reminisce about the glory days and their best kills. It would be better than these disrespectful legacy sequels they keep releasing. So yeah, that is my list for the worst horror sequels. There were loads of films I could have included on this list, as let's be real, the horror genre is full of bad sequels, but they can still be fun and entertaining. I'll probably return to this topic in the future, but next will be the best horror sequels and maybe some underrated ones. If there's any I missed that you'd like to see on a future list, please let me know in the comments, and please give me your opinions on these films, even if you think they are good. As usual, thanks for watching, fellas.